Thank you for that. Let's try that again. Hey, we are live. You should be able to hear me now. And anyways, we are live on both. Whoa, 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 whoa. There, whoa, that's weird. Let's take that off. Okay, anyway, we are live on both Zoom and YouTube. Zoom listeners, you get priority. So because you are part of my Zero to Pitch group. If you put your questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, I will see them and I will answer them first. There's a whole slew of questions that somebody asked on YouTube already. YouTube people, just put your questions in the chat box on YouTube, and I will absolutely positively get to them as well. With that, let's get started and let's have some fun. So give me 1 second. So we should have questions. There we are. Okay, perfect. So I think I'm ready to rock. So anyways, let's go. So the first question I have, this is a long question that somebody left for me. And this person's talking about that he raised about $1 million and he spent, I don't know, something about he's servicing 30,000 clients a month or something, the number of clients I want to serve. Okay, so he's talking about all the different people he's going to serve, interest on loans, don't really understand that. And he thinks he wants to raise a large Series A of $13 million. Okay, well, that's great. The key question here is how much estimated equity to give out at this stage. Okay, this is a great question. And I think the question you're asking is how much equity should you give to your investors? And you have it completely backwards because that's not the way the world works. So there's a great video that I did on this subject about how much equity should we give our investors. You can find it on my YouTube channel, and it walks through this exact subject. So let me cut to the chase. The chase here is that the answer is that the market determines the value of your company. You can say, hey, I only want to give you, 10%, 20%, whatever it is, in return for the money that I'm trying to raise, which is going to be a difficult challenge in of itself. But investors determine the value of your company. And unless you have a lot of investors competing for your equity raise, you're at their you're kind of you're left to their devices, so to speak. So that's the way the world works. So the reality here is that investors determine the value. The smartest thing that you can do is let them make you an offer first. Don't make them an offer. That's not smart to do. Let them make you an offer first. And then based on that offer, you can decide whether to accept it or not. You can always say no. You can always try and find other investors. You can always try and negotiate. But going first, this is not a smart way to go. So that's my little bit longer answer on this. Typically, if we're raising the type of money this person's trying to raise, which is $13 million, that's probably, and who knows whether you're going to be able to raise it or not. That's yet another subject. Just because you want to doesn't mean you can. But let's just say you can. That's probably, you're going to give up probably 20 to 30% of your company would be my guess. Okay. All right. So then there's a follow-up question is when should you raise funds? Well, when you're ready. That's the basic answer here for all of you on this call is when should you raise money? Well, you have to have enough milestones to be able to raise money as well. That's the other piece of this. So you have to have, if you're going to do, you're trying to raise $13 million, you've got to have a significant amount of traction in most cases, or else, and by traction, I mean revenue, or else you're not going to be taken seriously by investors. So anyways, I hope that answers your question. Let's move on to the next question we have on the list here. And this is also from one of our Zoom listeners who get priority. And Edward asks, I have a question for when you are ready. Okay. I am considering a strategy of using partnerships, alliances, and collaboration with possible competition over competing with them. I'm not sure what the question is. It sounds like that's more of a statement in terms of what you're going to do. As a general thing about partnerships, sure, they can work. Um, the one comment I would have without knowing, is this a good idea? Okay, I'm going to get there actually, because that's what I thought you were asking, is it can be a good idea. It's the challenge sometimes with partnerships, depending upon who they are. If they're with larger companies, many times the partnerships favor the larger company over the smaller company, is what I would tell you. Especially it is depending upon what we're trying to do. If the larger company gets access to customers and you don't, that can be a real bad deal for you, because then you don't know what to do next. And they're learning based on what you have. So you have to be super careful with partnerships. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. It's all a matter of what the deal is and what it's going to get you. And you have to think strategically, 2 or 3 steps down the road in terms of where you're going to get to and why are you doing this. So I hope that helps. Okay, our next question also comes from the pre-list of questions that I had on Zoom. You YouTube people keep asking your questions. I will get to you. The next question is, I gave my friend 2.5% equity, and now my friend isn't doing much. What do I do? This is a common problem. This happens all the time. Where we give somebody equity, they don't do anything, and now we're stuck with somebody on our cap table. What do we do? Well, hopefully the equity is vesting over time. That's the first thing. So hopefully you were smart enough to have the equity vest over time, so that the person's equity, assuming that this is quote unquote an employee, not a quote unquote investor, but let's assume it's an employee, their equity should vest over time, typically 4 years with a 1-year cliff, which means in the first 12 months, they don't get anything until that 12th month when they get a quarter of the equity. So, and typically I would tell you from experience, most of these co-founder relationships go bad in the first year. So what do we do? As painful as it is, and I've been in a similar situation where I had a friend as one of my co-founders. He didn't work out, and you have to choose the company over the friendship. That's the sucky part about this. And you may lose the friendship. I lost my friendship. This is a friend of mine who we were pretty good friends. We had gone on vacation together. Our wives were friends, and all that went away because you have to choose the company over the friendship. So beware when you do these relationships, because sometimes they don't work. About 50% of all co-founder relationships don't work. Okay, if you have questions for me and you're on Zoom, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A box on Zoom, and I'll get to them. If you have questions for me on YouTube, you can put them in the chat box on YouTube, and I will get them as well. Okay, there's a long string of questions from one person on YouTube. I'm going to get to this right now. He's asking me for advice. I'm interested in starting a company where I will be the sole founder and initial investor. My vision for the company is to establish a solid structure for long-term success. Okay. With me serving primarily as the founder and chair emeritus, I'm already getting nervous. That's me commenting. When I hear chair emeritus, I'm getting very nervous. I intend to build a strong organizational framework, including a board of directors, mentors, advisors, and an executive team. Given that I am self-funding the venture with a substantial investment, I would greatly appreciate your advice on the following: structuring the company. Okay, what are the key steps I should take to effectively structure the company to ensure its success, especially when my role will be limited to founder and chair emeritus, board of directors, and advisors? Okay, I'm going to give you some real tough advice here. PDC, this is the person in the chat. Don't found the company. You're going to blow all your money. I know that's tough advice, but I'm speaking from experience. If you're going to be in a startup and you're going to put your money into the startup and be the founder of the startup, and you're not going to run the startup, you are throwing your money away. If you think you're just going to give money and suddenly you're going to hire a bunch of people and they're going to do all the work for you, and and you're just going to sit there and have, I don't know, board meetings every month or whatever, you're throwing the money away. I'm sorry. That's why I got nervous. When I got to the punchline here, it was like I got really nervous. So don't do that. The smartest thing you can do if you're going to found a company, and whether you're solo founder, you're going to have a team with you or not, is you got to run the company. So anyways, you're making a horrible mistake. Don't do it. So the rest of this is kind of like, how can I select a board of directors that's irrelevant? All this is irrelevant. Mentors and advisors, all of it's irrelevant. So don't do it. Okay. More questions for me. If you're watching on Zoom, put them in the chat box. If you're watching on YouTube, there's a bunch of questions on YouTube, which I'm going to get to right now. You can put them in the chat box as well. Judith says, thank you for making this video live. You're welcome. Okay, a lot of thank you stuff. Chase says, have been watching a lot of your content as we navigate raising our seed round. Super helpful. Glad to hear that. Okay. Ray says, have you seen the recent Lex Friedman podcast with Peter Levels, whoever that is, who is an indie hacker, runs AI wrapper startups alone, makes over $100,000 per month? The answer is no, I have not. So can't answer anything on that. Mike asks, what will the first employee usually get in equity with a 20% ESOP? Okay, the percent of the ESOP plan is irrelevant. So because what an ESOP plan is for everybody, that's just an employee stock option pool. That means you've carved out 20% of the equity in the company for potential employees. Typically, an ESOP pool will last you about 2 years before you have to, guess what, carve out another ESOP pool. This is what we do. So the amount that an employee will get will be determined by what that employee does. So if we've already have a founding team and they have, let's say, the other 80% of the company, and now we have 20% for our non-founding founders team, or whatever we're going to call it, we'll call them a founding team, which is typically the early employees in a company. It's going to depend upon what the employee is going to get. If we're talking like C-level executives, which I wouldn't advise hiring at this stage unless it's just a CTO, then that person's probably 1% to 2%, I would imagine, non-founder. If we're talking about vice presidents, probably about the same level, 1% to 2%. If we're talking about directors, 0.5% to 0.75%, so forth and so on. The 20% is irrelevant. That doesn't matter because that just says, hey, this is the pool we have available to us. And what you want to do at the beginning is build out a spreadsheet saying, here are the people I plan on hiring, and here's how much I plan on giving them, so that you know how long that 20% is going to last you. This is kind of next step things. But if you have a board of directors, for example, and you have investors, one of the worst things that can happen to you is you have an option pool that you've all agreed upon, and you've agreed upon that it's going to last you a year or 2 years or whatever, and you have to go back to your board and your investors for more equity for that pool before you're supposed to. That really sucks, and they start losing faith in you. So plan it out properly. Okay. Somebody says, Halo says, I have a farm and I'm looking for funding to start my irrigation project here in Nambia. Okay. And does it mean, if I so happen to work with my partner, they will take my land belongings that belongs to my father? Well, gosh, I don't know the rules in Nambia, so it's hard for me to answer, but typically, boy, gosh, that's a real interesting one. It just depends upon the terms of the agreement in terms of what is it going to be. Is it going to be an equity investment? Then they have ownership in your farm. If it's a loan, then the farm might be collateral. So all these things need to be worked out. I'm not an expert in this, in what the loan is going to be, but that's probably the things that you have to look at, because I'm imagining if we're raising money, and you're looking for funding, I appreciate what you're doing, and I wish you all the success in the world to do it. Um, if we're raising money and it's a loan, then there's collateral on the loan typically, depending upon the devices that you're using. So that's what I would be worried about. So yeah, maybe. Sorry, that's not a perfect answer, but that's the best answer I can give you. Okay, next we have Cody asking, I watched that video about letting the market set the valuation. Good. And if they insist you go first, then you give examples of similar brands. That's right. Exactly correct. Perfect. I'm glad you watched the video. Okay. Okay. Emmanuel says to me, hi, I only have a business idea. Can I share it so you can tell me if it sounds cool or not? I'm the wrong person. You're the one who should decide whether it's cool or not. You should know what the market is and where you're going. Don't assume that just because I'm sitting here and I'm on YouTube that I'm going to have the answer for every single market and whether it's good or not. And even if I have an opinion on it, my opinion might be wrong. So, Emmanuel, you decide. You look at the market, you decide whether or not it's a good idea or not. And the way typically we figure these things out is by understanding customers and customers' needs, not by asking somebody like me who just happens to be on YouTube. So anyways, that's my answer. So interesting questions we're getting today. So if you have more questions for me, you can put them in the chat box if you're watching on Zoom, and I'll be happy to answer. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can put them in the chat box as well. On Zoom, you can also put them on the Q&A box as well. All right, let's see what we've got here. Chase asks, quick question. If we have a verbal commitment from an angel investor, should we keep negotiating with others? For context, he is our top choice. Okay, if verbal commitment, and you don't have a written commitment, it's interesting. I'm going to put a plug in here for my paid group, Zero to Pitch Gold, where we actually went over a live term sheet yesterday. And we went over exactly all the terms in the term sheet and everything else that was in there. We went over this exact scenario because once you typically sign a term sheet, in your case, you have a verbal commitment. There are legal things about verbal commitments. I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is sometimes a verbal commitment can be the same as a written commitment. So you have to be a little bit careful, in terms of all of this. So if you have a commitment from people, which is kind of like a signed term sheet, typically there's an exclusivity for a certain time period on that term sheet. So it's tough to go negotiating with other people, especially if you already have the verbal commitment from somebody. If you like the deal and they're your top person, then, one way to look at this is, what are you doing? Because you're putting in jeopardy, a relationship which is built on trust and built on integrity. You're putting all of that at risk by shopping. If you like the person, you feel good about them, and you want their money, then I would negotiate with them and just bring that to fruition quickly. Typically, angel deals can come to fruition very fast. So that's the way that I would look at that, for better or worse. So I hope that answers your question. Okay, if you have questions for me, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A box on Zoom. If you're watching on YouTube, you can put them in the chat box on YouTube, and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Okay, let's see what the next question is. So I want to ask whether you can invest in my startup. The answer is almost indefinitely is almost definitely no. I'm very picky about the startups that I invest in, and I only invest in spaces that I am expert in, and almost guaranteed I'm probably not an expert in your space. So probably the answer is no. Okay, let's see. what the next question is, mostly just waiting. Okay, so back to the question on the person who you're negotiating with regarding regarding whether he's going to become an investor. Set an expiration date would be the other thing you can do. In other words, if you're just waiting, say, hey, I need an answer by Friday. That's a way to put this to fruition and find out whether they're real or not. That might be a way of getting on with things if you're worried about that. Okay, Mike asks, what are some things that rarely happen but can happen when running a startup? I think somebody asked me this exact same question last week, and maybe it was you. The things that rarely happen but can happen when running a startup. Well, man, there's so many rarely happen things. Like, for example, my company was a semiconductor company, and typically in semiconductors, you work with outside fabrication facilities. I'll tell a quick story of all the crazy things that can happen. So we're working with outside fabrication facilities, and you have kind of like two choices. You can work with a big, well-known fabrication facility like TSMC that everybody knows, biggest in the world, which is what we decided to do, because you lessen your risk by working with them. Or you can work with a cheap fab, where you're saving money, but maybe you're going to have more problems. So we went with TSMC because, yay, we were going to have great quality with them. So on one of our first products that they developed, you send over essentially is what's called a tape out, which is essentially instructions of how to build this semiconductor. And on the first one, the first product that we did, they inverted a mask layer. What that means is, if you can imagine, it's like baking a cake, and there are different layers in the product. And one of the layers was inverted in terms of what was supposed to be turned on and what was supposed to be turned off. I'm really simplifying this. And in doing this, they created a short circuit in our product. So we figured it out. We went back to them, showed them the problem. They argued with us and said, oh, it wasn't us. It turned out to be them. They finally admitted it. But it cost us about 2 months of time. You never get the time back on these things. Then we also had the same firm run over wafers of ours. Cost us more time. They had to rerun everything. So you have all sorts of nutty, crazy things. Those are a couple examples of stuff that you would never think is going to happen to you, but yet happens to you in real life, when you're running a company like this. So those are a couple answers. Okay. Ragnar asks, advice on how to get first investment to establish my idea into a business. If I don't have any connection or capital, nor impressive educational background to impress any angels, have I got any chance? Okay. I think you're going about this the wrong way. In today's world, unless we have a track record of success, first of all, it's very difficult to get people to invest in our startup, almost regardless of what it is, with no traction. I'm going back to this traction point yet again, and again. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that typically the way the world works today is you can break up kind of investment into kind of 3 phases. Phase 1 is, how do we get started? Almost inevitably, it's friends, family, co-founders, and us. Those 4 groups of people, that's how we start. That money, whatever that money is that we can cobble together, that's how we get started. So if you're at the idea phase and you're looking for outside investment, unless you're somebody with a known track record and you're going after something really big, it's going to be really difficult to do this. So what are you going to have to do? This is just the rules of the world. What are you going to have to do? You're going to have to find money from your friends, money from your family, money from your savings, money from your co-founders. And that's how you get started. And then you get to the next phase. And then suddenly we're into the second group of people, which is typically angel investors. You can raise a little bit more money at that point. And then we get to the third group of people, which is, if we're trying to build something big and we're fortunate enough, is going to be VCs of some sort. And at each step of the way, we need to show more progress, which typically means traction, which typically means revenue. That's the answer. I have a video on this, by the way, in terms of how much traction you need. And you can watch that video. Okay, Jesse says, again, so I want to ask whether you can invest in my startup. Somebody else asked me this, and the answer is no. Probably I'm not going to invest in your startup because it's probably not in an area that I have expertise in. So no, sorry about that. So anyways, if you have questions for me, you can put them in the chat box. If you're watching me on Zoom, or the Q&A box on Zoom, or you can put them in the chat box if you're watching me on YouTube, and I'll be happy to answer them there. Okay, we've been talking for about half an hour. I'm going to take a little bit of a drink. And we'll go to the next question. Oh, wow. Okay, so Mike asks, I am not technical. What are some things that non-technical CEOs should be aware of when dealing with a technical team and a technical co-founder? Well, you can watch my video, which I just put out, I think 2 weeks ago, on this exact subject. That might be one thing you could do. I have a whole video on this exact question that you're asking, Mike, where I went over kind of what do you do and how do you do it. I'll give some general guidelines since we're all here together. And my general guideline kind of goes like this: is first, don't be something that you're not. In other words, if you're not technical, don't try and prove how technical you are. I've seen people do this all the time. I used to see this, when I traveled, running my company, or even before I ran my company, and I was a general manager, and you'd see salespeople who had technical backgrounds, always trying to prove to customers how technical they were, and they were the worst salespeople on earth. Why? Because they were trying to prove that they were something that they weren't. Be comfortable with who you are and who you aren't. Don't try and be technical. You're not. Now, having said that, you need to hire a really good technologist to be your co-founder or VP of engineering or your CTO. You're going to need this person. Don't be afraid not to hire this person. And you're going to have to sell this person on the vision of your company. It doesn't mean you need to prove your technical prowess. It just means you have to sell the person on how great your idea is and what you're trying to do is. That's what we do. That's how we go about these things, and that's how we get good answers, to what we're trying to do here. So you have to sell people on your idea. You have to be something. Don't be something that you're not. And then once we're in there and we find this person, then we get to the next stage of the challenge, which is, okay, I've got to go build out a technical team. Now, your technologist, this person you've just hired or brought in as your co-founder, is going to lead that effort, but that doesn't mean you don't have involvement in it. You're involved heavily in the recruiting of every single employee that comes on into the company. That's what we do. So, and that's what you would do too. So you'd be involved in probably the first 50 hires you make. You're going to interview all of them, including the technologists. Don't think you have to prove to the technologists how technical you are. That's the mistake. Don't do it. You have to sell them on the vision of the company. So that's what you would do. And then we're not done. Now suddenly you have your team, you have enough money to get started, you're building your first product. What do? Do you stay away from that part of the company? No, you stay involved in that part of the company. You ask tough questions, you use your common sense. So that's a long-winded answer of what we do as a non-technical CEO running a technology company. Okay, any more questions? If we have questions, put them in the chat box and I will be happy to answer them for you. If you're on Zoom, you can put them in the chat box on Zoom. If you're on YouTube, you can put them in the chat box for me on YouTube. Either way, I'll be happy to answer them for you. Just give me the questions and I am here to answer them. Okay, so we have a question coming from our Zoom group, which says, traction is to give empirical proof. Okay. I think he's trying to tell us something here. Okay. Okay. Oh, all right. Let me go ahead and read this because this is an interesting. I know what he's getting at. So let me walk everybody through this. So traction is to give empirical proof of concept and market. This gives an investor confidence their money will not be lost. If the customer survey is 100% no-brainer yes, and experts opine very strong, company with patents can equity in real estate substitute for traction when the business plan proves best to keep secret until launch. Okay. And then the answer is, again, it's you'll get the feedback on this. You can try that way. My instinct is, just because you're talking about a very specific thing about real estate, but if I'm talking about any business and you have this great business plan, you've done surveys or whatever, it's one step away from traction is my answer. If we have traction, we have power. We have a lot more ability to prove because we've reduced risk. And patents are not a substitute for risk. The company can look like it's a no-brainer, yes. And if it is a no-brainer, yes, like you say, then sure. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. Then if it's a no-brainer, then sure, of course, people will invest. But we have to make it a no-brainer. And the easier we make it for people to invest, the less impediments we put between us and investors, the less risk there is for investors, the more likely it is that they will invest, the less friction in a deal. Think of it like high performance selling. If we're selling something and essentially we're selling a piece of our company for millions of dollars, right? We're saying, you give me millions of dollars, I will give you a piece of my company. It's essentially all these investment questions are all like this. The less friction there is in the deal, the easier it's going to be to get the deal done. And remember, there's always another deal. So if you're too difficult to deal with, then as an investor, I just move on because I don't need the problem. I'll just go to the next one. So anyways, that's the longer-winded answer. Okay. The next question is, okay, this is the question on the farm coming back again that we had earlier. I'm not really looking for a loan, but I'm interested in working with a venture firm. And is there a way to work with a VC firm on my farm and I don't end up losing the land owned by my father? The answer is I don't know in your particular case. I mean, I don't know whether the investment makes sense for a VC firm. Maybe in Nambia it does. You have to think about the investors that you're going to get to invest. In your particular case, my guess is those investors are going to be somewhere in Africa. And somebody has to look at how much money they're going to invest in you and how much they're going to get back. Just because we've heard the term venture capital doesn't mean that it's available to everybody, unfortunately. It's a tough world out there. And I'm trying to think rationally and logically about your challenge. Because as a venture investor, venture investors want a way to liquefy their investment, which means how are they going to get their money out? So if they give you whatever amount of money it is that you're asking for, how are they going to get the money back? That's why I thought maybe a loan might be better for you, because the loan says, okay, I'm going to pay you back over a certain period of time with interest. And there may be loans in Africa which are ideal for what you're trying to do. And that may be a better way to go. So I don't know the answer. I mean, you have to talk to VC funds in Africa and see. It depends upon what it is, because if I'm trying to get a product back, because I think what you're saying, is there a way I can do this without risk? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know how you do it without risk, because the risk is if we're looking for money from somebody, there's either a product or a return. Now, and you're saying, well, if it fails, which is I think what your question really is, if it fails, then what happens? That's just the terms of the deal. That's the answer. Okay. This is the next question, which Mike asks, is a really good question. How do I discuss my idea with potential technical co-founders without getting it stolen? There is a risk of this happening, and I did have something similar to this happen. I will tell you the moral of the story first is that people can steal your quote unquote idea, but they can't. It's very difficult to steal your vision and your passion for what you're doing. So even though it happens, I wouldn't worry about it. I think part of the thing is when we are in this mode of trying to build a great team and you want a great CTO to be your co-founder, right? You want somebody really good. Well, why is this person going to join your company? They're only going to join your company if they really believe in what you're doing. And if they really believe you're going to be a partner in what you're doing. So part of this is a vetting process, right? So you have to sell the person on your idea. You can't not do that, right? You have to sell them on your idea. And then you have to vet them. Part of vetting them is looking at the integrity, looking at what they've done, getting a feel for the person. This takes multiple meetings, to do this. This isn't like one meeting and the person's going to join your company. This could be several meetings before this happens. So anyways, that's the answer to your question is you have to kind of take a risk. There's no way about it. There's no way around it because without taking the risk, you're not going to hire somebody. You're not going to hire somebody really good because ask yourself this question. If you were on the other side of the table, wouldn't you want to know what's going on and what this company is doing? By the way, you could certainly have them, you can certainly try and do NDAs, but I don't think that's really going to help you either, quite frankly. I think that doesn't build trust. To me, and you'll hear this saying a lot is, ideas are worthless. And I know all of us founders think our idea is worth tons. It's the execution of the idea that really matters. There's somebody else out there that has a similar idea to yours in all likelihood, and it's probably good that they do because that verifies that there's a market out there for what you're doing. So personally, I wouldn't worry about it as much as you are worried about it. And I know the feeling because I've been there. You just got to hire the best. And the way you hire the best is by being vulnerable and putting yourself out there. Okay. Next question is from Viv, I believe. And Viv says, it's been about 5 years since I started my business. I pivoted to a new model 2 years back, and I'm not at $1 million in ARR. And I'm not at $1 million in ARR for a consumer app. I don't have much connections with investors. Can I delegate fundraising to a friend who is from Harvard Business School who is working part-time with me? No. No, you can't do it. Your friend can help you. If your friend knows people to meet with, great. Have your friend get the introductions for you, but you got to do the meetings. You got to do the selling. You've got to do the fundraising. Full stop. That's the best thing that you can do. You have to do the work yourself because, again, put yourself on the other side of the table here. If I'm an investor and I'm not talking to the CEO of an early stage company, and I'm going to give that company money, forget it. I just move on to the next company because if I'm not the most important thing to you and you don't have the time for me, forget it. I know it's hard. I know it's tough, but you got to be the one to raise the money. Okay, let's see. Next question. Edward asks, and this is in our Zoom community. He says, speaking of NDAs, when is it the right time and choice to use an NDA? Well, it's a really good question because, first of all, on NDAs almost inevitably are unenforceable or really difficult to enforce, may be the way to put it. Should you do them? Yes, you should do them. And we'll get to when you should do them in just a second. But if we're thinking they're a panacea and they're going to keep people from spilling the beans and secrets on what we're doing, it's really hard to enforce them. Now, who should we do NDAs with? Should we do them with investors? Almost inevitably, for early stage companies, the answer is no, because as an investor, I will walk away. Most investors will walk away. There are exceptions, there are always exceptions to the rule, but 99 times out of 100, the answer is no. And the logical reason for this is then they can get sued, right, if they invest in a similar company. And if they're talking to you about investing in your company, they're likely talking to other people about investing in similar companies to yours. So they don't want to be bogged down with an NDA. So that's a loser. And interesting enough, when I was first raising money for my company, my co-founder, my VP of engineering at the time, who ended up, interesting enough, trying to steal my company's idea, which is yet another story. We were in diligence with an investor. Out of the blue, he said to the investor, didn't tell me he was going to do this, said to the investor, you need to sign an NDA. And I sat there speechless and just bit my tongue while he did this. It was wild. And I watched this play out, and the investor said, well, we can stop the meeting right now. I'm not signing an NDA. And I just sat there and patiently waited, grinding my teeth while I was patiently waiting. And finally, my VP of engineering backed down. So investors just are not going to sign these things typically. So when's the right choice to use NDAs? Once we're operational with potential customers, maybe with potential vendors, things like that, where you're giving early information on something, you might sign an NDA. In partnerships, interestingly enough, I think you asked about partnerships. If you're doing partnership deals, yes, you'll do bidirectional NDAs with probably any partner that you're talking to. But again, remember, they're almost impossible to enforce. So you have to look at integrity is really important in business. Don't think a document is going to save you. Look at the integrity of the people that you're working with first. Okay. If we have questions, put them in the Zoom chat box if you're watching me on Zoom, and the same on YouTube, or you can put them in the Q&A box. And if you want more of this and you want it to be even better than this, you want to have a conversation with me, actually, rather than just doing it this way. The best way to do that is join my paid group, Zero to Pitch Gold, where we actually have office hours every day. In fact, we're going to have office hours in about an hour and 15 minutes from now. And you can talk to me, actually, rather than just sending me chat questions. By the way, before I answer the next question on the list, I'll get there in just a second. Next week, we're going to do something different. Here, rather than doing an Ask Me Anything, I am going to do, and I'm going to see how this goes. We're going to have fun with this. Because I get asked this all the time by people in my free community of Zero to Pitch. Will you review my pitch deck? And I typically will say no, because I'm just overwhelmed with questions like that. People will send me pitch decks and all of that. But because I do AMAs every week, I thought to myself, well, it could be fun to review pitch decks and give people an idea of whether or not their pitch deck is good or not. So for everybody on the call, if you send me your pitch deck, the way to do this, by the way, is join Zero to Pitch. That is my free community for startup CEOs. If you join that, if you join Zero to Pitch, you can send me your pitch deck. Say, hey, Brett, I want you to review this next week in our pitch deck review session that we're going to have probably next Wednesday or next Thursday. I will review at least 5 pitch decks. The first 5 I get will be the first 5 I'll look at. I'll probably spend about 10 minutes per pitch deck or so. So if you want to do that and you want a review of your pitch deck for free, that is a way to do that. Okay, let's go to the next question on our list. We've got a little bit of time left. So if you have questions for me, and by the way, if you think this is a good idea, let me know in the chat box. Say, hey, Brett, great idea, can't wait, or something. And let me know what you guys think. But I think we're going to do that next week. Reza asks, or Reza, I think might be the better way to pronounce that, says, is it possible to successfully outsource the tech development of our startup to a dev shop? If so, how to find a good one? Yeah, it's possible to do it. People do this, by the way. So yeah, absolutely, you can do it. Let me talk about though the positives and the negatives of it. The positives are obvious, right? We'll save money probably by doing it this way. It gives us an instant team by doing it this way. The negatives of doing this is we don't retain the IP. And what I mean by this is that there's a value inside of a tech team. Once we develop something, there's this, even if it by IP, I don't just mean patents. I mean the knowledge of how do we build this product, which then we can use to build the next product we're going to do, and we can use this to build out our team. So that's the downside of doing this. So yeah, you can do it. And it's a great way for people who are on a budget, which most of us are, to get started. If we don't have a team available, you can do this. Now, the other downside of this is you have to manage the team. And you're managing an outside team. It's always more difficult to manage an outside team than a team that you have that you're working with in the same facility. So you have to make sure that you have, if we're going to bring something to an outside team, the team has to have very set milestones, which are like set in stone, that are obvious. And the payment schedule has to be set that way too. How do we find that? You're going to have to search around for the right team for what you're trying to do. Is too broad of a question for me to answer. Okay, the next question that we have, the Raffinix, I think, says to me, does a startup need this big global scaling tech ambition to get funding? Or is it realistic to get funding for a company that's doing something boring, non-tech, and maybe in a niche market? Well, it depends upon the non-tech niche market that we're going after. Can we get funding? Sure. And by funding, by the way, most companies do not get venture funding. 99% of the startups that are started don't get venture funding. So sure, can you get funding for what you're doing? Absolutely, you can. And boring sometimes is good because guess what? In boring businesses, they don't attract as much competition. So boring can be good, profits can be great. So sure, go for it. Where should you find your funding? Which is probably the next logical question that you're going to ask, is look for people in and around your industry. Those are the likely sources of funding for what you're trying to do. I hope that helps. Mike asks, how do I go about releasing software in other countries when it's time? Is this something hard? I don't know what the software is that you're releasing, so it doesn't sound like it should be hard. But maybe there are particulars about what you're doing. You have to think it through, just like anything else. I'm thinking about products that I've been involved with that have been released in different countries. And certainly I've never seen problems with software products, but maybe there's something specific there that I don't know about. But yeah, you just have to think through what would be specific. Like, for example, this isn't a software product, but I'm thinking about a medical device product that I was involved in advising the company, and they had to think about the requirements of releasing the product in different countries based on what they were doing, and they had to get various approvals. Those are the types of things you have to think through. Okay, the next question on our list, Cody asks, my friend seems willing to invest enough money so that I can get more sneaker designs created because the backstory and niche are very powerful. So biz plan or pitch deck first. Okay, I'm not a big believer in business plans. And I'll tell you why, because business plans end up in a desk drawer and nobody looks at them. Pitch decks you use all the time. So do your pitch deck because your pitch deck is your business plan. So that's the answer to your question. We have time probably for a couple more questions. So if you have questions for me, put them in the chat box and let me know your questions either on Zoom or YouTube. You can do that. Viv asks, how do I push investors to make decisions fast? And how do I justify valuations? Okay, this is, I think, probably the third time I've answered this question today, and I get asked a variation of this question just about every time I do one of these AMAs. Okay, the market determines the valuation. Who is the market? Investors. So you can think, I'll make up a crazy number. Let's say you think your company is worth $100 million. Great. Congratulations. And investors, though, think, you know what, it's worth 10. Who's going to win that fight? The investors are going to win that fight. So the reality is the investors who are the market determine the valuations. The smartest thing you can do if you're raising money, and there are exceptions to this, like, for example, if we're raising money from multiple investors, like multiple angels at once, then you would set the valuation and you would be smart about how you would set the valuation. But if we're raising money from venture capitalists, then typically the answer would be, I'm going to let the market determine the valuation. You can always negotiate from there. You can always do that. That's the way that you would do it. Okay. If we have any other questions, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A box. For me, we've got a few minutes left here, so I'll answer maybe two more questions. I've got one in our YouTube group. And Reza asks, if you were to start a new venture, how would you find comprehensive lists of angel investors with their emails? Okay, it's kind of a two-part question. What I would do to find investors, and you can do this for free, by the way, is there are several tools out there. My favorite is Crunchbase, crunchbase.com. I think they have a free trial. I can't remember whether it's 14 or 30 days. But you can go in there, and the beautiful thing about Crunchbase, no matter where you are in the world, there will be a list of investors that you can find, you know, for both the stage of company, the type of company that you're doing, and the geographic region that you're in. All of these are there. So that's the beauty. So do that, and you can find your investors. Then to find emails, sometimes Crunchbase may have the email. If they don't, a great free tool is hunter.io. You can find just about anybody's email. And just put in there, they work at Venture Fund X and blah, blah, blah. It will pop the email and it is free. So that's the answer to your question. Okay, I think this one, or maybe, okay, these two questions, and maybe I'll get to one other, but we have a question from PDC and then from Julian. And we'll answer those questions. And then if I have time, I'll do more. PDC says, thank you for a response. I understand your concern about the implications of not being involved in day-to-day operations of the company. However, I'm considering a slightly different approach. What if I were to hold the, I'm just shaking my head because I don't think you're getting it. What if I were to hold the title of founder and chief emeritus in name and title only, but secretly and privately manage the company's day-to-day operations behind the scenes? Why would you do that? You're just creating problems for yourself. Sorry, I mean, it just makes no sense. If you're the CEO, then you're the CEO. Why the cloak and dagger? It makes no sense to do this. And if you're trying to raise money from, I guess you're going to do this yourself, but it makes no sense. I would never do it this way. Just be the CEO, be the leader. How are you going to attract people this way? It's just people are going to be scratching their heads. Okay. Julian asks, how important are pitch decks for a pre-seed startup? I think they're very important personally, because, and I think they're more, if you're thinking about, well, I've got to raise money. I think the first thing, who are pitch decks really important for? They're important for you, the CEO. The beautiful thing about a pitch deck is it is the story of your company. It is the business plan for your company. And because we're going to be showing our pitch deck not just to potential investors, we're going to show it to potential employees because we've got to sell them. on joining our company. So a great way to sell people is share your vision, which is your pitch deck of what you're doing and why. So you're going to show it to lots of different people. So I think they're super important. Okay. All right. I think that's going to be because the next question is way too involved about, I'll try and answer it. Maybe as our last question here. Could you provide insight on the following feasibility and risks? What are the potential challenges and risks associated? What are the potential challenges and risks associated with this approach and how it might impact company structure? Governance, maintaining transparency. How can I ensure that the hidden involvement, the same thing again, does not create issues with the board of directors, executive team, or stakeholders? Best practices are don't be hidden. I'm sorry, I'm a broken record. You're talking to the wrong person. If you want to do something nefarious, you're talking to the wrong guy. I can't help you because what you're doing just reeks of doing the wrong thing. Sorry. So just get this out of your head, please. Okay. Darren's question is going to be the last question that I answered here. What do I think about special purpose vehicles or like SPACs and things like that? They're like shell companies, I think is what you're describing. And they can be great ways to go public later in life, as a way to do it. There are companies that do it this way. Again, as long as you've got everything lined up right, you're going to give up a percentage of your company to the special purpose vehicle, to do it. But sure, there are companies that do it, and is a way to go public, and it works. There are pluses and minuses to it, but that's just too involved. So, anyways, with that, let's see. So we have 1 minute to go here. So I think we're pretty much done. Again, if you want better insight, deeper answers to your questions, join my paid group, Zero to Pitch Gold. It's a great way to get the questions to your company answered quickly, all those types of things. And next week, if you're interested and you want your pitch deck reviewed, I'm going to review 5 pitch decks live on Zoom and YouTube, and I'll give detailed answers on what I think about your pitch deck. It's a great way. People ask me this all the time, and I have to tell people no. And this is a way I can kind of help people and give people some insight on what to do and what not to do with pitch decks. All right, with that, let's see. I've got 2 super quick questions. Hopefully I can answer here that just popped in. What do you think about skipping a seed round to maintain equity? Well, if you can, great. Fantastic. If you don't need the money, then don't take the money. Next question. How do you test the markets to see the investor interest? How do I A/B test my pitch? Well, there's really no way to A/B test your pitch. The way that I would do it is I would go out to about 10 investors, see what the feedback is, and based on that feedback, make adjustments. That's how you kind of test the market. Don't go to everybody at once. By the way, as a final point, it's about 100-to-1 ratio. For every 100 meetings a investor, be it an angel investor or VC takes, they will invest in about 1 company. So flip that around, which means you got to talk to lots of people to raise money. All right, with that, we are done. So thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks for coming today. Take care, and I'll see you next week when we do pitch deck reviews. Bye.